I just want to welcome you here today on this Sunday. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the executive director of writingworkshops.com, and we're just thrilled that you're here. And we're very thrilled and very honored to have Joe Ide with us today, leading his seminar, Writing the Killer Crime Novel, or How to Increase Your Odds of Getting Published. Joe, as you all know, is the author of the celebrated and best-selling IQ series, the first installment of which was the winner of the Anthony, the Macavity and the Shamus Awards, and was nominated for the Edgar Award for Best First Novel. Joe grew up in South Central Los Angeles, where his favorite books were the Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes stories. Joe went on to earn a graduate degree and had several careers, including Hollywood screenwriter, before writing his debut novel, IQ. Janet Maslin, writing in the New York Times of the IQ series, said, IQ has aggressively entertaining plotting paired with the kind of dialogue for which readers love Don Winslow. The series is a Los Angeles classic right from the start. And Mike Lupica wrote in the New York Daily News that IQ is Joe's brilliant imagining of what Sherlock Holmes would be like if he came out of East Long Beach. And Booklist went on to call Joe a noir master. Joe's fifth and latest novel in the IQ series is Smoke, which was published in February of this year. Snoop Dogg has signed on to executive produce a forthcoming TV series based on IQ. And needless to say, we're really excited to have Joe here today. So if you have questions, put those in the chat. We'll get to them later. And without further ado, I want to welcome Joe Ide. Thank you so much for being here, Joe.
Really, truly, thank you for having me. And thank you, everyone, for joining me. Before I start, just a little background. I grew up in South Central LA, in an area that was full of crime and gangs and all the attendant problems of the hood. But you know, as an experience, it wasn't any different than what millions of kids go through every day. My grandparents lived in the area because it was close to Little Tokyo, and my family lived with them because we were just scraping by. My grandparents were very, very old world. They spoke almost no English. They were very stern, formal people, very traditional. My grandfather collected samurai swords, and my grandmother had a koi pond. She wore these beautiful silk kimonos around the house. And they treated me like somebody else's cat. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't actually kill me, but they didn't have to be nice to me either. My parents, they aspired to get out of the hood, be Brady Bunch mainstream, and that's what they wanted for their kids, me and my three brothers. But we'd adapted to the neighborhood. You know, most of our friends were Black. So we co-opted, you know, their style and attitude, musical taste, all of that. So there was always this cultural, generational tension within the family, made more so by the fact that my parents and my grandparents wanted us kids to, you know, have some connection to our own cultural heritage, which never really worked out the way they'd hoped. My parents, they made me take a ceramics class in Little Tokyo. And so I get there, and it was taught by this very famous artist. He was from Japan, a friend of my grandfather's. And I get there, and there's 8 or 10 of these obsessively clean-cut suburban Japanese kids. And there I am, I got a toothpick in my mouth, and I'm wearing my Ray-Bans indoors. I know I have got to get out of this. So here's what I did. Everything I made was somehow phallic. It wasn't obvious, but it wasn't subtle either. You know, it would be like a perfectly ordinary teapot, but you know, you wouldn't necessarily want to pick it up by the handle. My older brother, he got kicked out of a Japanese Boy Scout troop for buying his merit badges. You know, he didn't really get the whole, you know, Boy Scout concept. And I'm 4 years younger. I'm really jealous, you know, because my parents were so proud of him. And what was all the more aggravating was that I knew it was a scam. I knew my hood rat brother couldn't, you know, build a wigwam or paddle around in a kayak. And so kind of net result of all of this was that I was culturally all over the place. I wasn't Black, I wasn't white, and I felt way far from being Japanese. You know, through much of that time, it really felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. I was a misfit. And I think that's why why I was so drawn to the original Sherlock Holmes. I mean, here's a guy, he's like me. He's a misfit. He doesn't belong. And he's not a badass. But unlike me, Sherlock had an identity. He had confidence. He knew who he was, and he could overcome all of his obstacles with just his intelligence. That was a very powerful idea. I mean, I'm a small kid in a big neighborhood, and that idea represented a kind of hope. What it meant was that I could face my own world and not be afraid. And when it came time to write a novel, all of those elements came together almost by themselves. And Sherlock in the Hood was born. Okay. Writing the killer crime novels. The subtitle of the class is How to Up Your Odds of Getting Published. And I say that because book publishing is the most competitive business there is. Even in my genre alone, there are thousands upon thousands of titles already in print, not to mention the hundreds of books that come out every week. Now, so if you get a book published at all, congratulations. That's an accomplishment. That's a feat. It really is. But if you're going to make your living writing novels, that is an entirely different level. For starters, and this is if you're career bound, you prefer to get published by one of the big houses. They pay more. They have bigger budgets to promote your book. That's not to say a smaller house can't do it, can't build a career. Many have, but we're talking about upping your odds. For a new writer, it's almost impossible to cut through all the book noise plus every other kind of entertainment noise. To up your odds, you need a publishing company that's behind you, that believes in your book. If they're going to invest their resources, they have to have a book they think is killer. Publishing isn't some philanthropic effort on behalf of literature. It's a business, and they're looking for a great product. There's a finite number of dollars in the marketplace. So if you make a sale, you're taking a sale away from somebody else. So there I am in my favorite independent bookstore, choosing between Michael Connelly, Laura Lippman, John Sanford, and you, the new guy. You're going to lose that contest unless you have the goods. There's some buzz, there's some media coverage, there are great reviews. Otherwise, it will be one more okay novel. The publishing company won't spend money. It's in Barnes and Nobles for a week and then it's gone. So again, if your ambition is to be a successful writer, to up your odds, your book should be killer. Writing novels is a career. It's a profession like any other. Whether like being a nurse or a veterinarian or a blacksmith, it's multiple skill sets learned over a long period of time. Aspiring writers don't like to hear that long period of time thing, but there's no way around it. I mean, name a profession that doesn't take a long time to master. You hear somebody say, well, I'm going to write a bestseller in 6 months. In what other field of endeavor would that apply? In 6 months, I'm going to be a great carpenter and build a house. No, in 6 months, you're going to cut your leg off with a bandsaw. No. It's as if you were saying, like, okay, I'm going to be a chemical engineer. It's a career. And it's one of those things, commit or don't commit. A lot of aspiring writers assume that because they can write other things, they can write a novel. That's not true. Because you can play golf does not mean you can play tennis. They are different skill sets. You read these gurus who say 12 steps to writing a bestseller. Well, how many steps are there to be a successful teacher? There are no steps. There's just a lot of hard work. The gatekeepers are agents and editors. These are your judges. You can't get anything past them. They read everything, and they've spent their lives reading and evaluating books. And nobody gives you a break because you're new or you have some great potential in the future. Your book either stands up to scrutiny or it doesn't. However hard you are on yourself, they will be harder. The biggest thing standing between the aspiring writer and getting published is the writing itself, separate apart from content. If you don't write at a professional level, nothing else will save you. Not story, character, possible franchise. You have a lot of great ideas. If the writing's not there, you're just done. You know, I've had a reviewer told me if she opens a book and reads 2 pages of amateur writing, she just closes the book. And I've never heard anybody say in publishing that they will read more than 25 pages before they close the book. You know, it's like applying for a job at NASA and saying, you know, I skipped the whole aeronautics thing. No, it's like it's too much math. It's boring. You know, the writing is that fundamental. You will only get one chance, to put your book in front of a real gatekeeper. 2, if you live long enough. Don't blow it. Don't blow it. Be absolutely sure. Because, you know, they're not going to read a rewrite. They're not going to read your second book. So be sure your book is there, and we'll talk more about that. New writers get ahead of themselves. They think about agents and marketing, movie options. The book comes first. Write the great book, and then, you know, all that stuff will come in due time. New writers hurry. You know, they're anxious to make the money and to get the glory, and that's fine. I mean, among my motives. But if you go to market with a mediocre book, then all that hurrying didn't matter. Many new writers think somebody's going to steal their idea. Ideas are highly overrated. You know, look at Michael Connelly, Louise Penny, Robert B. Parker. Detective case. It's the execution that counts. A high concept idea can help, but it's the writing that really counts here. I have a writer friend, Felicia Yap. She wrote a book called Yesterday. Here's the one-liner. A woman has to solve a murder, but she can only remember what happened yesterday. A pretty cool idea, but she would not have sold it unless she executed, and she's a terrific writer. Disabuse yourself of the notion that publishers are looking for something in particular. You might hear someone say they're looking for the next Harry Bosch, but what they mean is they're looking for the next Michael Connelly. They're looking for writers who can sustain a career and write quality book after quality book. Reagan Arthur, the publisher at Knopf, said, I want what all publishers want, great writing and a fresh voice. Publishers know, you know, that you can't anticipate what the marketplace wants. The marketplace doesn't know what it wants. You see advertisements for books and seminars. Find out what's hot, fantasy, sci-fi, YA. I'll tell you, if it's a great book, everything is hot. You remember that book, Life of Pi? It's about an Indian Tamil boy who spent 27 months on a life raft with a Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. You know, based on the idea. You wouldn't put a lot of money on it, but fresh voice, great writing. It sold 10 million copies. Money. Nobody ever told me about money. Advances from one of the big 5 range from 25,000 low end, 100,000 on the high end, 100,000 being very rare. I got $100,000 advance for 2 books. The only reason I got a little more is because my agent's a big wheel and they didn't want to upset her. Okay, here's how the deal broke down. I got $40,000 up front, 20 for IQ and 20 for the book yet to be written. Then I got $15,000 when I finished the rewrites of IQ to my editor's satisfaction. That took months. Then I got on publication day. And these payments were stretched out over a year. So I made 70K, less 15% from my agent, and whatever the taxes were, and I got what I got. Before you get a dime of royalties, you have to pay back the advance. On the first 5,000 books, it's 5%. On the next 5,000, it's 12.5 and 15% on the rest. You have to sell a hell of a lot of books to pay back $100,000. No, my royalties on IQ, and it was blazing hot out of the box, were $10,000 the first year, and I didn't get it until the second year. What happens is your third novel catches on, and then people start buying the first and second, and you generate some momentum. That's why you have to write book after book to make a living. And it's why publishers are looking for writers who are good enough to sustain a career. TV and movie options. I talked to my agent that does books to media. I told him I wanted, people to be realistic about money. He said, you want to be realistic? You're not going to sell it. Meaning, options are very rare despite what you read. I mean, you have to look at this in the context of thousands. The producer of the TV IQ show, he said average fee from a major producer goes from $500 to $7,500. There was a 6-way bidding war for IQ. I got $22,500, which my agent said was extraordinary for a new writer. Less commissions, taxes, I got what I got. Be realistic about money. Okay, nuts and bolts. A caveat. I'm going to say you should do this and you should do that. But what I really mean is, this is how I do things. This is how I approach writing, how I solve writing problems. So bear that in mind. There are lots of writers out there who do things in completely different ways, and they're very successful. So this is just me. Character. Every aspect of your book stems from character. That is the source. Developing a character has a lot to do with empathy, your ability to put yourself in your character's head and understand motivation. If you can't do that, how do you know what your character is going to do or say in any given context? Let's say you come into the den and there's your significant other lying on the sofa watching TV. And by the way, this motivational thing, when you get in your character's head, you're not there to judge, okay? You're not judging, you're there to understand. So you come into the den, there's your partner. And the first thing you do is make a judgment. He's such an incredible slob, how much trouble is it to wear both slippers? There's just no point wearing a robe if you're not going to close it in the front. Instead of asking yourself writer's questions. Why is there a vacant look in his eyes? Why is he watching a program he doesn't like? Why is he wearing a bathrobe at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? From this moment on, you are a student of human nature. And basically what this means is shut up, stop talking, pay attention, no more 1,000-yard stare. When you go into a social situation, you don't need to tell your favorite anecdotes and nobody needs to hear them. You're not a participant, you are a spy. Who's lying? Who has a hidden agenda? Who's intimidated? Who's a drinker? Who hates their partner? Try and imagine motivation. Why are they doing what they're doing? Because that's what you're doing with a character. Look for facial tells and voice inflection, posture, attitude, details, not for any particular purpose, but you start to absorb different aspects of human behavior that you can use in your writing. A woman friend of mine said, you can't tell a woman's economic status by her clothes, since everybody wears jeans and Nikes, but you can almost always tell by the handbag. I'm going to use that somewhere. I walk my dog about the same time every day. So I'm going along, neighbor lady comes out of her house, and I know she was waiting for me because she's walking a little too fast and a little too eager, to be getting the mail. So somehow we converge on the sidewalk. She immediately starts talking about her trip to India. I took a raft up the Ganges and I went to the temple with all the rats and I ate, street food and didn't get sick. And I'm thinking, she's not telling me about India. She's saying, look how adventurous I am. Look what a risk taker I am. I'm not just some rich lady lying around in my house. I'm out there in the world. I'm cool. And because I know that about her, I could write her. There's an ongoing character in the series named Duranda, homegirl through and through, came up hard, grew up on the streets. And when I wrote the first book, I needed an attitude for her, like her stance against the world, what she's like walking around. My first girlfriend, Stephanie Farrington, she lived 2 doors down. She was 12, so I guess I was 11. She was a head and a half taller than me, and outweighed me by 30 pounds. My brother said that when we held hands, she looked like a ventriloquist with a Japanese dummy. I thought that was a little harsh. Everybody in the neighborhood, was struggling, but Stephanie's family was destitute. There was never any food in the house. And she had a little brother, a little sister who were always running around crying, half naked. And her mother was an alcoholic, who walked around with a sawed-off piece of broomstick and just whacked who was ever closest to her. And Stephanie came out of that with a certain attitude, which was, whatever I get in this life, I'm going to have to take it. And whatever it is, it won't be good enough. And she was like that about everything. It's the wrong size, it's the wrong color, it's not the one she wanted, not the one she saw on TV. On and on and on and on. I mean, I shared my lunches with Stephanie and she complained about the sandwiches. And the reason is that nothing would ever fill, that empty well of needs or make up for her life of poverty and despair. And because I knew Stephanie, I could write around it. There's a tendency to define character by 2 things. And one is lifestyle. He lives in a penthouse, drives a Maserati, or he lives in a log cabin, drives an old Jeep. And expertise. Pilot a helicopter, knows how to use all these weapons, knows martial arts. And, there's nothing wrong with those kinds of things. I use them myself, but that's not the essence of character. The essence of character is what that person is thinking and feeling while they're doing whatever it is they're doing. I'm not all that interested in a character who throws people off rooftops. I can throw somebody off a rooftop. What interests me is what that character is thinking before, during, and after he throws somebody off a rooftop. And that's what will distinguish that character from every other character that throws people off rooftops. I tell aspiring writers, there are no new ways to kill people. Nobody's going to be impressed by cannibalism or poison suppositories or anything else. But the guy who thought a poison suppository was a good idea, he's of interest, but only if you can impart some element of humanity. In the 3rd book in the series, Wrecked, the bad guy is a man named Walzak. He's ex-CIA, committed atrocities at Abu Ghraib, runs a big security company like Blackwater. So we know he's powerful and ruthless, and there is absolutely nothing new there. Now, Walzak is hunting for a woman named Sarah. She has photos of him at Abu Ghraib doing horrible things. And this is Walzak's reflection. He envisioned the photos appearing in the New York Times and on CNN. He could see the media outrage metastasizing to every country in the world. His name synonymous with cruelty, depravity, and perversion. The most excruciating part, his family. The business was Earth and he was Atlas, but his family was his only true source of happiness and the only people he knew who still saw him as a patriot, a hero, and a great human being. He had to destroy those pictures. The thought of his darling wife, Patty, seeing him rape a helpless woman made him sick. The thought of his precious son, Noah, knowing his father was a monster, made him want to die. He'd never been so afraid. Not when the desert night was lit with tracer rounds and the mortar shells exploded so close you thought you were finished, and you could hear your fellow soldiers screaming and dying in the rubble. None of it frightened him more than the revelation of his beastly heart. We may not like people like Walzak, but we can identify with his vulnerability, his family. We can invest in him, even though he's a bad guy. I mean, who really cares about a car chase unless you're invested in the people in the car? And the more human you can make that character, the bigger clash between antagonists and protagonists, because you, in a way, can root for both sides. A writer named John Rogers wrote, "You don't really understand an antagonist until you understand why he's a protagonist in his own version of the world." I think that's true. You ask a drug dealer, "Are you a bad guy?" He'll say, "No. You know, I'm just out here taking care of business, taking care of my own." Objectives. Before you write anything, you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to say here? What's my objective? Am I moving the story forward, revealing character, advancing a relationship, creating atmosphere, setting up something that will happen later? You know, a lot of aspiring writers just write and write and write and write and write, and they end up with something incoherent. You have to define what it is you're trying to accomplish. This is from IQ, chapter 1, first paragraph. I have multiple objectives here. I want to tell the readers where we are without doing a big description of the hood. I want to create conflict between Isaiah and his environment. And I want to intrigue the readers to pull them toward the next paragraph. Isaiah's crib looked like every other house on the block, except the lawn was cut even, the paint was fresh, and the entrance was a little unusual. Your first clue is the word crib instead of house. And if your house is distinguished because the lawn is cut even, you are not living in Beverly Hills. The security screen was made from the same heavy-duty mesh they used to cage in crackheads and bank robbers at the Long Beach police station. Another reference to where we are. The front door was covered with a thin walnut veneer, but underneath was a 20-gauge steel core set in a cold steel frame with a pick-proof, bump-proof, drill-proof, Medeco double-cylinder high-security Maxim deadbolt. You'd need some serious power tools to get past all that. And even if you did, there was no telling what you'd be into. Word was, the place was booby-trapped. The objectives. We know where we are. I've done that. There's conflict. Isaiah's house is in conflict with the neighborhood. It's discrepant, suggesting that he may be discrepant too. Intrigue. Who needs a door like that? Who needs a lock like that? Why would anyone think the house is booby-trapped? And most importantly, who lives behind that door? Conflict. There should be conflict in every scene. If that's a paradigm, it's not really possible. But conflict in every scene. So two people talking pleasantly, but underneath something else is going on. I covered your wife. I hate you. I'm going to fire you as soon as I can. If there isn't that undercurrent, then they're just talking. Nothing should be easy. Nothing. Guy drives to work. There's traffic. He's late. He lost his briefcase. He can't focus because his kid is sick. He hates his job. Otherwise, he's just driving to work. Say a character enters her apartment, turns on the light, but it doesn't work. She stops. She goes, why? Why doesn't the light work? Her cat doesn't greet her. Why? No, the cat always greets me. Or maybe she's an alcoholic, but there's no booze in the house. Or she's waiting for a phone call that doesn't come. You're trying to create tension. That tension and maintain that tension throughout the entire book in ways big and small. When a book flags, one of the reasons is the writer let go of the tension. And now it's just stuff. Another reason a book lags is because not enough happens. Take Michael Connelly. Something new happens every 2 pages, you know. Bosch can't find a witness. He has a confrontation with his captain. He wants to check out his daughter's new boyfriend. He's got a new lead. He needs more evidence, like bam, 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 one thing after another. And he does these really cool asides, where all of a sudden he's called to a crime scene and he gets to display his detective prowess. And we learn more of that fascinating police procedure. There's this 4 or 5 page riff in one of the books. I forget which, but it's anyway. The 4 or 5 pages are about opening an evidence box. There's this whole thing about opening an evidence box, and you come away thinking, that was really cool. That's part of pace. It doesn't have to be events. Look at The Road. Cormac McCarthy won a Pulitzer. Dystopian future after the apocalypse. There's nothing. No lakes, no birds, no nothing. Man and a boy are traveling, presumably to a better place. There are no other major characters to talk to. The boy is a boy and has a limited vocabulary, and half the book is the man's interior dialogue. Memories, regrets, relationships lost, practical questions, how are we going to get food? The boy is sick, what do I do? There's all the pace you will ever need. Emotion. This is part of making a scene work, making a scene interesting. And bear in mind, a book is another form of entertainment. One of the things I look for when I'm writing a scene is the emotional stakes, like Walzak. And when I write action scenes, I want the reader to have an intense experience, but I also want it to be about more than kicks and punches. I mean, you've read and seen these action scenes where it turns into just a bunch of people running around. Part of that is because the stakes aren't clear. The emotions aren't clear. In High Five, the book came out 2 years ago, there are hired killers in the story. 2 women, Sal and Annie, longtime partners. This is a scene. Sal was getting angry. She set her beer down. You better shut up now, Annie. They went quiet. There's a particular kind of stillness before a fight starts. A moment where you either reconsider or the shit is on. Annie backed up 3 steps, giving herself room. Sal tensed, bent her knees and spread her feet. The shit was on. Annie lowered her voice and spoke steadily without pause. Don't tell me to shut up, Sal. Don't you ever tell me to shut up, you stupid bitch. I'm not afraid of you. Who do you think you are? I'm not afraid of you. You want to get into it? Let's go. Annie didn't raise her voice, but the words were getting louder. Sal was breathing hard, her head expanding, her pulse like a war drum, her anger coiling into fury. Annie didn't stop. I'll fuck you up. You hear me, Sal? I'll kick your ass. So go ahead and make a move. I'm ready for you. Always been ready for you. You don't mean shit to me, and you never did, you dumbass whore. Shut up, Annie. Fuck you, shut up. Why don't you, your fat ass over here and make me? But you won't, because you're scared of me. You're scared of me, you ugly bitch. Something broke inside of Sal, a pressure gauge, a release valve. Blindly, wildly, she charged. She grabbed Annie by the shirt, took a punch in the face, and threw her into the credenza, a lamp crashing to the floor. Annie was up in an instant, a fucking instant. Annie was fierce and unafraid, a killer who had killed many times before, but so had Sal. They faced each other. Every slight insult and contemptuous look, every dismissive remark, scowl of disapproval, derisive laugh, boiling up inside of them, a surging, ruthless energy as unstoppable as an axe descending on a prisoner's neck. Violence between lovers was never about the present, Sal thought. Each of them was proof of their fucked up lives. Each was to blame for their barren futures. Emotion is what readers key on. We want to feel something when we read. So how did I come up with that scene? That's the writer's work. I knew they were going to have a fight, but what actually happens? What do they say? What's this about? And to grind on it until you finish, until it's where you want it. That scene, which is, I think, 2.5 pages in the book, it took me over a week to write it. That's the writer's work. Dialogue. Each of your characters should have a distinct way of speaking. Vocabulary, syntax, word choices, cadence. Otherwise, this sounds like network TV, where anybody could be anyone. Just like, it's just like your friends or family or your favorite characters. Whether it's Philip Marlowe or Chili Palmer or Miss Marple, the way they speak is one of the things that makes them memorable. Juan Dodson, my favorite character to write. He's an ex-hustler, slick, opportunistic, very self-involved. But in Wrecked, he has a new baby. And the responsibility is overwhelming, especially to a guy like Dodson. And here he talks it over with Isaiah. "What's flaming, son?" Dodson said. He strolled in like the landlord, an icy breeze with an attitude, condensed of stature, but walking large. "So what's up with you?" "Nothing special," Isaiah said. "How's Micah?" Dodson made a face like he was remembering a car accident. "Man, that baby is work. He can't do nothing for himself, can't even hold his oversized head up. You got to watch him all the damn time." "You didn't know that going in," Isaiah said. "Knowing and doing is two different things. Sharice makes me wash my hands every time I pick him up. I don't keep my toothbrush that clean. And the kid is always spitting up and he farts like he's full of propane. I couldn't believe it first time I changed his diaper. He don't eat nothing but mother's milk and his shit's the same color as hot dog mustard. And for some reason, we always hurrying, rushing around. I couldn't tell you why. Damn baby ain't no bigger than a pot roast, so you ain't going nowhere. And everything's a damn crisis. Boy gets a rash on his ass and Sharice and the mama carry on like he had a tumor on his neck. I said, what y'all worried about? Everybody gets a rash on their ass at one time or another. I got a rash on my ass right now." "How'd that go over?" Isaiah said. "Like I farted at a funeral." You're not going to mistake Dodson for anybody else. Elmore Leonard said, "Everybody talks," meaning everybody can say exactly what they want to say in their own vernacular. And the effect of this is to elevate the character. Dodson is no longer a hustler. He's this hustler. He's this particular hustler. I use backstories to build character. I think they help in terms of understanding the circumstances that brought a character to this point in their lives, like on the brink, willing to do extreme things. Emmeline Owens was in military intelligence, one of Walzak's team. She also did terrible things at Abu Ghraib. And while she wasn't court-martialed, she was discharged dishonorably, and she was looking forward to a long career in the military. Owens worked behind the bakery counter at Vaughn's, putting lemon tarts and banana cream pies into display cases and spelling out "Happy Birthday, Grandpa" on chocolate cakes. Owens had volunteered after 9/11 because she wanted to help her country. She wanted to make a difference, be a patriot. Then she got over there, and what she was doing felt disconnected from anything to do with country or patriotism. It was like the house was on fire and you were somewhere else pulling weeds. And that was what she brought back with her, that disconnectedness, the feeling that you had separated yourself from the human race, and now you were something apart and broken and alone. She wanted Jimenez. Who else would have her? No normal man could know what she'd done and not leave in disgust. Owens is damage, and that damage makes her a character. Rewriting. Rewriting is not rereading. It's kind of going along. That's pretty good. I like that. I'll tweak that. That's not rewriting. When you're rewriting, you're asking yourself two questions. The first is, what's wrong? What's clunky? What doesn't work? What doesn't need to be there? What doesn't make sense or follow logically? What's badly written? The second question is, how can I make this better? Clearer, more exciting, more intense, funnier, better written? If you're rewriting and you're not finding at least 3 things on a page that are wrong or need to be changed, you're not working hard enough. No. And you should find 3 things wrong the next time you rewrite and the next time you rewrite. And remember, no matter how self-critical you are, the gatekeepers will triple that. The prologue of IQ is 2.5 pages long, something like that. He wrote it 26 times. 7 different takes, and I rewrote those. I'm not suggesting that you be as neurotic as that, but I knew going in, these were the first pages a gatekeeper would read. And so they had to be spot on. Here's a little pet peeve. If you use common idioms in terms of phrases like it's not rocket science or a blessing in disguise, through thick and thin, drop of a hat, those kinds of things, then you're just the laziest bunch of writers in the history of literature. Make up your own, okay? You're a writer. And if you go through your pages and cross out everything like that, if you're anything like me, you look like the CIA redacted it. And I'm telling you, that stuff flattens out your writing. It just guarantees you will be generic. What to do when you're stuck? I find it helpful to be the character. I'm not watching the character, I am the character. If Isaiah's running from the police, I'm in the car, I'm driving the car. I can see the road, I can hear the sirens. And because I'm driving the car, I can see what Isaiah's options are. You know, turn left, turn right, back up, go over the cliff. When they say a book is character driven, it means the plot goes forward based on the character's decisions. The character decides to rob a bank and robs a bank, decides to rescue the kid and rescues the kid. So when you're stuck, don't ask yourself what's next. Ask yourself, what would your character decide to do in this situation? And because you know your character so well, there won't be that many options. I like to write myself in a corner where there's no way out for the Isaiah, and then write myself out of it. Because you and your character have to do things that your very smart audience won't see coming. I'm writing a scene now. Isaiah's being held at gunpoint. They're all alone by a hitman, and they're alone. There's nobody around. The barrel of the gun is an arm's length away. How does he get out of it? He's unarmed, and the guy he's facing is a pro. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. But I can. I mean, you know, I'm the writer. I can manipulate the scene however I want. So I decide to give Isaiah a weapon that isn't obvious, because in that situation, he couldn't pull a gun or a knife. I research hand weapons, and I come up with a sap cap. It's a regular cap, but it's got a hidden compartment that holds material that's 110% the density of lead. So, guy's got his gun on Isaiah. Isaiah reaches up, gets the brim of his cap, it's not a threatening move, and then brings it down on the guy's gun hand and breaks his wrist. You can do anything you want. Of course, you should read. But the difference for you is you study what you read. You have all the masters right there on your bookshelves. If you want to understand suspense, read Joe Nesbo. Watch how he layers in element after element. He cranks up the tension until you can't stand it anymore, and then he keeps cranking. And you're trying to understand the mechanics of it, you know, like come away with a blueprint. It's the same with dialogue. Read Elmore Leonard, or historical suite, read Child 44, Tom Rob Smith. And if you want to learn how to write simply and effectively, without not a lot of flourishes, stylistic touches like mine, read Thomas Perry, read The Butcher's Boy. It's one of the best thrillers I've ever read. It's so tight and it's so well told and in very simple language. You know, if this is your profession, you should have a relentless curiosity about your craft. when a med student is examining cadaver, not just poking around in there, right? They're trying to understand how this thing works. And that's you and writing. Vocabulary. All of you have a wide speaking vocabulary, but many aspiring writers have a very limited writing vocabulary. Words are your tools. The more you have it at your command, the more you're able to express. I use a thesaurus at least 5 times a page, at least 5 times a page. There are a million synonyms for fight, kill, run, shoot. And as you incorporate different words into your writing, it starts to become, part of your style. A voice. For a long time, I didn't have my own definition of voice. I had other people's definitions, but not mine. And so when I was rewriting the second book, I started to figure it out for myself. When I'm writing, I'm making thousands of decisions, literally thousands of decisions. This word over that word, this paragraph above or below this paragraph, what needs to be cut here. There must be a better simile here. And literally thousands of decisions. Now I'm not conscious of them anymore, but they come more instinctively, but still they are decisions, and there are thousands of them. I think cumulatively, those decisions are your voice, because nobody else would make the same decisions as you. But that assumes you asked the thousands of questions that led to the thousands of decisions. It's just a rule, man. No rigor, no work ethic, no voice. If I haven't made the profession attractive enough already, I'll tell you, there's nothing glamorous or romantic about being a novelist. Now, I'm not lounging on a deck chair with a glass of white wine looking at the ocean. Here's my day. I wake up around 7:30. I have 3 cups of coffee and I go to work. And there I am, in my pajamas. There's taco juice on my keyboard and I'm talking to my dog. And I'm like that until 1 in the afternoon, around 1 in the afternoon. And then I go do whatever I have to do. I come back around 4 and put in another couple of hours. I do that every day, 7 days a week. Like most writers I know, this certainly isn't unique to me. When I was touring, I went to different cities to speak, and they're fun. You get a lot of love. But if you took all those events and put them together back to back, less the travel time, it amounts to about 2 weeks. To do this job, you have to love to write. If you sort of kind of like to write, it's going to be very hard to sustain yourself over 300 pages. It's like saying I'm going to win the New York Marathon, but I sort of kind of like to run. I get sweaty and my ankles hurt. You have to be honest with yourself. Not everybody has to write a novel. It's one of those things. Commit or don't commit. If you have questions, I'll try and answer them.
Thank you, Joe. I've received some questions ahead of time and also in the chat. So we'll start out here with, I'll paste it into the chat and I can read it for you if you like.
Yes, please.
And we've got a few of them to get through. So we'll start here with Jennifer. Jennifer asks, do you have any advice for so-called literary writers who tend to focus on character and subtext, but for whom plot might have been considered a dirty word in their MFA programs? Jennifer says they're trying to figure out how to center propulsion, plot as much as character. So I know you've kind of touched on that through language and voice, but anything else for Jennifer?
That's what they said in your MFA program? Wow. Well, plot structures your book. It makes it a story as opposed to a series of anecdotes. And like I said before, plot comes out of character. You know your character well enough, you put him in a situation full of conflict, and what does he or she decide to do? And that's what develops plot, those decisions. It's not that simple, but the readers want to see their characters overcome obstacles. How will this character get out of this? How will the character do this? And so you're placing obstacles in front of that character, and then you're asking yourself, what would this character do in this situation? And how, in other words, how are they getting to their ultimate objective, whatever that is? How do they get there? And what am I as a writer going to put in the way to create situations that are interesting and entertaining? It is, the two things are inseparable. I think no plot or a very vague plot, and I've read literary novels like that. That's fine if that's what you want to write. It is. They're all forms of novels, and I have no beef against any of them. But if you're looking at writing a novel in sort of the conventional sense, and write a novel for the general mass of readers, then plot's very important. Plot's very important. But again, it comes out of character.
Okay, Joe, I put another one in the chat here from Matt. Matt says, I have just started a career as a police detective after a number of years in uniform. I am an aspiring writer, but have not made a start as yet. What is the best way for me to use my experiences at work toward writing? I am aware that there is a bounty of possible material and ideas around me, but don't know how to coalesce them into a single story idea and get writing.
Yeah. Again, this is part of the writer's work. What's the story you want to write? What's the story you have to get down on paper? Yes, you have a million choices, but what's the one that you go, yeah, I want to write this. I have something to say. That's how you choose that story. It's a question of your emotional connection with that story, with that character. You have to choose from your own sense of story and emotion. And really, truly, what all of that, what's the stuff, what is the thing you want to write about? A particular detective, a particular case, a particular criminal, but that's really, up to you. And it's not about which one will work, it's about which one you want to write. Because if you don't want to write it, or you're sort of into it half-ass, again, it'll be very hard to sustain yourself over 300 pages. You have to be passionate about getting that story down on paper. And the other thing I'm asked is, how do I start? How do I start? I'm looking at a blank piece of paper. How do I start? I start in increments. When I wrote IQ, I wrote the first page, that paragraph and the paragraphs that follow. And I worked on it a long time, so it was pretty good, so that I knew I couldn't write any worse than that. And the first page informs the second page. The second informs the third. Then I started writing in bigger increments, 5 pages, 10 pages. The thing is, if you're a new writer and you look out at 300 pages, man, it's really hard to wrap your head around, and it's really hard to outline if you don't know what you're doing. So that's the way I wrote then, and that's the way I write now, although the increments are a bit larger. But I would start with page 1. Yeah.
Okay, Joe. Chuck asked, you touched on about this a little bit when you read the scene with Sal, but how do I create a protagonist that readers identify with and empathize with?
Mm-hmm. The best source of that material about vulnerabilities and human characteristics is yourself. What are you afraid of? What are the relationships you just don't want to deal with? What are your problems with your partner or your boss? Or what are the problems in terms of reaching your aspirations? These are exactly the same things that your character will go through. You ask yourself, you transpose that into whatever the story is, but those needs and vulnerabilities come directly from you. Your life is great. Your life has more material there than you can imagine. It's like Walzak. Walzak is this horrible person, but he's vulnerable to his family. He doesn't want them to find out horrible things, just like you and I don't want our families to find out horrible things. Well, his stakes are a little different, but that humanity is common to all of us. So when you're thinking about vulnerabilities, think about yourself and then transpose it to your character, whatever the situation is. But that's where I start. I have all kinds of, fears and anxieties as anybody else. And that's a great source. It's a great source of material.
So there's a little follow-up question, Joe, and I'd read somewhere that someone had said that the IQ series was kind of as if Tarantino had written Sherlock Holmes. Mm. And so the question is, how much violence and street language, both slang and profanity, will readers tolerate? Chuck asks.
The question for me is not how much. It's, would the character say this in this situation? Is it honest in that sense? Is this really what the character would say? That's how I judge. Would the character say that? If it's slang, if it's profanity, fine. But it's a question of being honest and not generating dialogue just because it's convenient or because you think it sounds in a particular way. If you read the IQ novels, there's actually very little slang. Because I don't want the slang to define the language. I don't want people really to key in on that. I try and use profanity as an emphasis, as an exclamation mark. The Black vernacular is mostly about flow and about cadence, like a Black comedian say. So just reflect on that. It's not that does the scene require profanity. It's a question of, would your character curse in this moment, and in what way? The violence is sort of the same decision. With these two characters in this situation, resort to violence. I don't create scenes just to have a violent scene. I'm trying to build the characters up and their conflict big enough to require violence. It's like an honest decision. They would be violent in this situation, but that's the way you make that decision, not in terms of quantity.
Okay, Joe, final question from Chuck. I know you talked about starting. You start in increments. You started with a page and then you did 5 and then 10. But Chuck asked, does rewriting work best at the page level or on a scene level?
Wait, what was the last part of that question?
Does the rewriting work best at the page level or on a scene level?
That's how I rewrite it myself. I go through it scene by scene. I go through it sentence by sentence. And I do this usually on printed pages because it looks different, sounds different when it's on the page. I also read everything out loud. That's really important. Read your work out loud because you will hear stuff you just don't see. Now, it sounds different and you'll hear the things that don't work. I mean, read the first 5 pages of a writer you admire out loud, and then read your first 5 pages out loud. And you will hear the difference. You will hear the difference. I did. You can't, all I did was wince. but that helps too, reading aloud.
Okay, Joe. Chris asks, for a good story, how much should be narrative and how much dialogue?
You don't measure. You don't measure. It's what does a scene require? Like I come to a scene that it's a new location. So because it's a new location, I'll spend a little more time on it. If the two characters are talking and the conversation is worth, in a story sense, extending the conversation, I'll extend it. It's just what is required here. And it goes back to objectives. What are you trying to achieve? What's this scene about? You know, what are these two characters? Why are they talking? Objectives. If you know your objective, then you'll know how much narrative, how much dialogue. Like, I don't know how much dialogue is going to be required as I approach a scene, but I am clear about what I want to accomplish in this scene, what I want to come out of it. At the end of the scene, do they hate each other? No. Do they solidify a friendship? What is it I'm trying to do with this dialogue? And if I'm doing narrative, some scenes, locations require more description than others. Now, in that opening scene with Isaiah in the crib and all that, I made a decision. Did I need a lot of description? You know, is that the way? Was that my objective, to like provide a description of the hood? No, it was to get past the location and get right into the story and get right into those discrepancies. But the objective comes first. Objective comes first, and you write as much as you require.
We just had another question, Joe, come in the chat. When rewriting, do you start at the beginning, middle, or end? Or what do you pick to rewrite first? Do you go chronologically?
I wouldn't recommend my process to anybody, but I'm rewriting, I'll write, say, 50, 60 pages. Then I'll go back and I'll read it again. And because I know now what happens on page 50, I know what the first 49 pages require. Maybe I left something out. Maybe there was an opportunity to write about something interesting that I didn't pick up on. So I'm writing and I'm looking back and I'm rewriting. So I move forward in those increments, always going back and rewriting, because what you need on page 100 may not be in the first 99 pages. And maybe you need a subplot or another character, or, you know, like the scene I described, a sap cap. That's how I do it. And when I finish the book, then I go back to page 1. And then I'm looking at nearly sentence by sentence. Because I want every book to be better. I want to get better at my craft. And that means being harder on yourself. Is this really the best I can do? That's what I ask myself, you know, after I finish a page or a paragraph. Is this it? This is the best I can do, Ide? You've written all these books, that's the best you can do? Ask yourself that. But yeah, that's how I do it. I go up and back, up and back, up and back, and then I start from the beginning and go through it.
Okay, Joe, we have a series of business of writing related questions. So we've got 3 of them that are kind of related. So I'll start with 2 that are kind of close. Chris asks, how do you get in front of a gatekeeper? Is it pretty much just the query letter? And then we had another question about query letters. It's kind of related. Can excellent first pages overcome a weak query? How do you gauge if your query is weak? So some query letter writing questions.
I've never written a query letter. But I have, there's a lot of instructions about that on the net. I've never written a query letter. And so I don't know really what goes into them. I got my agent a different route. And in terms of getting an agent, I don't know any more than anybody else. You know, the answer is any way you can. But I don't know. I got my agent out of sheer luck. I'd written the IQ manuscript. I didn't know anybody in publishing, but I have this cousin, name is Francis Fukuyama. He's a really world-renowned political anthropologist, and he consults with governments, that kind of thing. He's on the board at RAND. So I asked him if he'd read it, and he said, sure, but I don't really believe him. He's on the board at RAND. But he did read it. He said he liked it. No, and if I had an agent, I said no. And he said, well, I'll hook you up with my agent, who turned out to be a woman named Esther Newberg, ICM in New York. She was head of literary for 30 years. So that was the first person that read my book. It's a terrible story to tell aspiring writers, but again, I don't know how to get an agent any more than anybody else. I don't. I will say this. Self-publishing on Amazon, there are success stories. But the last thing I read was there are only, I don't know, a few dozen writers who actually make enough money to sustain themselves. It was something like 40 writers who made $250,000 over the last 2 years. It's a tough way to go, but there's so much competition. Unless you really promote the book yourself. It's very hard. But it all depends on the book.
Okay,
yes.
Joe.
Yes, Carl Hyacint's agent.
Oh yeah, Carl. Linda wants to know, what about writers writing their first novel and they're over 65? Do you think publishers and agents will be interested?
They don't care. They don't care how old you are. You know, when an agent reads a book, the only thing he or she is evaluating is what's on the page. That's it. They don't know you. They don't want to know. They have no reason to until they read the book. So, you know, I was almost 60 when I wrote IQ, and they really don't care. They don't care if you're from Jupiter. They just want a quality book.
So if anybody else has any questions, put those in the chat, but we do have one final question from Don, and this is another business of writing question. Was your royalty split the same for hardcover and digital?
No. There's a different formula. There's a different formula that's based on the retail price, but I don't know what that formula is. It's less. And different for different formats, but I don't have the formula offhand.
And then it looks like we got one more question from Micah, which kind of goes back to querying agents, but might take a swing at it. Is there a specific format to be used when presenting a book to a publisher or agent?
No. Mine was just, you know, text on pages. I didn't pay attention to font or anything because, again, they don't care. They're looking for a great book. They're looking for a great book. They don't care if there's coffee stains on it. They're reading the book. And in terms of all of these, you know, agent questions, is your book ready? I mean, are you ready to go looking for an agent? That's the key thing. Do you have a great book? Or do you have a book that you just want to get out there? That's not a smart move. If you just want to get it out there, to give yourself a chance, but the book comes first. You write a great book and it'll find its way.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions that we have, Joe, for today. I want to thank you very much for being here with us. When I send out our follow-up email to everybody, there was a lot of people who couldn't make it. I'll include, you know, a link to the whole IQ series for people who are interested in that if they haven't yet picked it up. I'll send out some resources for querying, which we have some of those here at writingworkshops.com. And other than that, just brilliant presentation, Joe. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Appreciate your
Thank you
time.
very much.
And just before everyone leaves, did you want to say anything about what you're working on next, or is that a secret?
Yes, self-promotion. I wrote a Philip Marlowe novel. The state asked me to write one, and you can't really refuse. And it's coming out in February. It's called The Goodbye Coast. It's contemporary Philip Marlowe. And the writing wasn't daunting because I can only write the way I write. But the idea of disappointing millions of fans all around the world, that was a little, intimidating. But there you go.
Okay, well, we'll look for that in February of 2022. Again, thank you, Joe, and thank you everybody for being here today. We really appreciate it. Best of luck with all your writing, and if you have any follow-up questions for me or anything, I'll send you out the email afterwards with the resources and some links to IQ. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.